All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be talking, just realized my slide is completely on the wrong one here. There we go. We are going to be talking about intelligent interior spaces. And today we're going to start to imagine the future of what interior spaces could be. We're constantly in built environments. We're constantly in buildings and in places that humans have crafted and created for us to be inside. So today we're going to be looking at the Intelligent Interior Design Framework that is part of Professor Sowles' research. And then I'm going to be tying in how that relates to human-computer interaction and human-building interaction. So thinking about the user experience of those intelligently built interiors. And then we're also going to take a look at how today, right now, without being in the future, we can start to pull some of the resources we have access to and create our own intelligent interiors today.
Intelligent design is not new. I know we think about anything that has to do with technology as in cyber technology, but what I mean by intelligent interior designs is my research, yes, does deal with what will happen 20, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when I imagine every single surface and thing that you interact with will actually have the ability to learn from you and morph into the thing that you would like it to be. And then it learns, and then it automatically becomes what you want it to be based on your own preferences. So historically, you see what we would call intelligence in design going all the way back to the 1960s, which was with the cybernetics. And then we quickly move by 1980 into smart environmental systems, which are actually, say, your HVAC systems, your thermostats that you can manually adjust. And then by the late 1990, we move into ubiquitous computing, which has to do with networks surrounding us, which culminates with the development of the PC. And then from the PC, we move to software technologies such as Revit, which is a modeling software. And then by 2001, we move into parametric design. And it's by the late 2000s, 2009 roughly, that we start to see augmented reality and virtual reality really hit the design and construction industries. And then as we move on, in 2015, approximately, we started to really see an influence of the Internet of Things. And then by 2020, 2025, we will really see a full release of even having our computers or screens through zero user eye or zero user UI, and then which is prompted by 5G technology. So what I mean by, how do I move this? By intelligent ID or interior design is it's design that's generated by cyber-connected technologies, as I said before, and it's the concept of things being interactive, not just something that, like a keyboard that you're playing with. So right now, we are approximately where Siri is. Our devices can communicate with us, but by 2020, next year, we expect to see 50.1 billion devices that are connected to the Internet of Things. And then by 2030 is when we hopefully will see zero user interfaces. So I'm going to briefly, this is my framework. It's a teaching and a research framework that I've developed, and that is the 3 technologies that are the vehicle to designing intelligent design. Not only are the tools intelligent, but then the outcomes themselves are intelligent. And so they all work within a system. They all are connected to the Internet of Things, and then they will be greatly assisted by zero user interfaces. And so the first domain is smart geometry. And smart geometry is a parametric program, and it's based on algorithms and coding. And this is the it's an experiential and aspirational end of or design tool. You see Frank Gehry uses this, or Zaha Hadid will use parametric designing tools. Some of the different examples is through nanotechnology, which is design exploration with materials, and even immersive environments, where in this second, the last slide, the concrete has been 3D printed and it's infused with LED lighting. And so at night, the LED lighting lights up, but it's actually, the lighting is actually part of the structure itself. And I have a couple examples of people that are doing, they're really experimenting, and they're crossing over between art and design, or design as art. And this first example is Nuri Oxman out of MIT, and this is their large 3D printer that within a day or 2 days they can print a structure. So these are just examples of the types of things that are going on. Everything is still in an experimental phase. So you're seeing it in smaller scale. But Nuri Oxman also talks about the fact that she thinks that her lab, they believe that buildings will begin to grow themselves, like a plant. And then another example would be, let's see, Michael Hansmeyer. He produces these, he calls them digital grotesque. The 3D printer does these very minuscule layers of design, but the program is actually, the design program is formulating the design, and each small layer is slightly different than the layer above it. But he has several large structures that he's completed. However, you see a lot of his work in museums today as sculpture. And once again, they have organic, almost biological forms, and the structure is very similar to how bones, actually, the layers of bones and how stress points, they'll become, your own bone will become stronger in stress areas. I think this is beautiful. It's just phenomenally beautiful. So moving on, ambient intelligence. To me, this is the area that can today, in my technology, we see the most things happening in ambient intelligence because it has to do with interactive design and user interfaces that we're either designing around them or we're using those technologies within the space to create an experience. These are a couple of examples. Just an immersive, this is an immersive kinetic skin that as the viewer or occupant walks in, the skin will morph to the occupant and then the lighting will adjust as well. The tower over here is one of my favorite structures to explain this concept. It's a Lars Skybrook out of Amsterdam designed this, and this tower through social media, it monitors social media and what's going on in the news on a daily basis, and then according to the mood of the community based on social media, the tower changes color constantly to register whether they're angry, happy, sad, which I think is, so obviously at this point this is a piece of art, but this could become an actual environment. And then ambient intelligence really allows for design personalization, and I think this is a direction people are moving. As a designer, and say you wanted to work directly with the end user, you could give the end user an option within the design format so that they could go in and actually shape the design. As long as it stays within the parameters of your basic design, they can choose the color. Then they could take even the design that they've purchased from you and have it 3D printed at a makerspace, or you can 3D print their specific design and send it off to them. This would work for us really well in, say, the accessory or furniture markets, even special finishes. This second example is a group that they do tiny homes, and their homes come in kits. They snap together, but the individual can actually go and look at their various design options based on cultural influences, and so they can pick a certain roof, a certain type of window, a certain type of door, and they can custom make their tiny home to how they would like to use it. And I have a couple of examples of this, of what's happening today in these areas. Let's see. So this is a experiential display in Notre Dame in Paris. Obviously, this was done before the fire. And this is another this was down at the Broad Museum. So in the final area of technology, this is it's a workhorse for our industry. It's information modeling, and this deals with Revit and BIM, which are Autodesk products. the parametric companion to this would be Mac, Adobe Creative Space, yeah, 3D Max, right? 3D Max. And the reason it's important is because that they're distributive technologies, meaning that a designer can design something, then immediately forward all of the files on to contractors, subcontractors, fabricators, and a dollar amount can immediately be placed on the item that's being designed. And today that's very important in the construction industry because a lot of buildings are over $1 billion. And so if you have a 2% cost increase or an unknown amount of money, it's a very significant problem for the design team and the construction team. So, but within BIM and Revit, there are 7 different layers, and the very top layers of the program, you have virtual reality and augmented reality. But with these design tools, what you're seeing a lot of are kinetic and dynamic structures that are being designed. And that's either the skin being a kinetic skin of a building where it's opening or contracting based on the environment around it, whether it's light or water or heat, air. 3D printers, CNC routers you're seeing in this being used a lot in this industry or within these design tools. And then we use the virtual reality and the augmented reality. The augmented reality is often used as a overlay so that we know in the walls where all of the mechanical systems are. And then, or water pipes, so you're not going in and you know what is behind the wall or what's in the structure. It also, during completion of designs, it used to be that in a multi-story building, you'd have hand drawings that once you built the structure, all of a sudden the ducts were going through the middle of steel beams, and so then the building had to be, those changes had to occur during the construction process. And today that can all be eliminated. The other thing that they're using virtual reality for is, say you have a large building that you're constructing and you want to be able to do virtual tours with avatars through the structure while it's still in the design phase, so that the individual, the client, and the design team can actually tour the inside of the structure before they even begin building, so that the client will understand how they feel about the building and if they would like to proceed or change something.
This really also ties back to when we think about user experience design. And when we're dealing with user experience design and we're doing multiple iterations of a design and while we're developing, right, in that iterative process, by being able to see the building before we get started with the building, we're not in that waterfall approach anymore. We're in an iterative process where we can find out problems before we build them, because it's a lot easier to fix before we have to take a sledgehammer to it, right?
So, and I just have a couple of examples of things that are being done right now. It's this is an example of furniture where furniture can be, this is a kinetic piece of furniture where they're literally, this table doesn't have leaves. You can simply, by pulling it apart, it expands and can become several different, a totally different shape and length. And then this is a video of what they call the Ori systems out of MIT, and these are kinetic systems. And the point is to have a very small space, but the space is structurally flexible. And so it goes from a residence to, or small residence to a little larger residence, and then they have one for like an office restaurant space. So this is the office. So the walls fold out, fold in, furniture goes in, is folded into the walls. The walls are on, actually this wall systems are on tracks and they move in and out. They have a party. Yeah. So from my research, I basically have two overarching conclusions. And the first is that interior design of the 21st century typologies of buildings will no longer be the way we think of things, but instead we will begin to think of design of interiors as a range of interiorized experiences. And the second is that the paradigm shift of the 21st century is that the thinking, once again, our thinking will be a result of those those interiorized experiences. And so what do I mean by that? We will no longer think of hospitals, we'll think of health and well-being versus hospitals. And let's see, an example of this would be, for instance, you're in how do you make the experience for the individual that's going through procedures as, how do you reduce the stress levels and how does it become as comfortable as possible? Another, so you know more about this, right?
So this is an example of what we mean by when we start to talk about a wellness center. So instead of thinking about a hospital where we're going when we're sick or we're going for our checkup and they're saying, well, you're not terribly sick, so you're fine, right? We take your blood and we check your levels and everything, and yeah, you're pretty good. You're good enough. You're not broken, so you're fine, right? Well, a wellness center is the opposite of that. Instead of checking when something's broken, it's a constant monitoring so that we can understand our personal data. You could think of a wellness center, for instance, similar to like if someone's wearing a Fitbit or a smartwatch and it monitors it monitors your different levels and your heart rate, and you get that data, and then as an individual, you can do something with that data, right? You can use that data to make different choices about your lifestyle, about your eating habits, about your exercise. So you're preventing getting to the point where you have to go to a hospital. At a wellness center, you come in and they do a very comprehensive look at all of your statistics, and then they go over them with you so that you understand them. And then as an individual, you leave with a report with all of your personal data, and you can use that to your advantage to make choices that are going to further your wellness, right? And so this is the type of place that it doesn't have to be in a medical facility. They can be smaller. They could be in workplaces, similar to how we have small gyms in workplaces now. You can have a wellness center. They could be kiosks that you could stop at, maybe at your local gym or other places, so you could get a quick check on your wellness to keep you out of the doctor's office.
So another area that we will vastly see change is learning and education. And it'll move to edutainment. If you think about a student, how much more beneficial it would be for a student, say if they were in a history class, for that student to actually be able to engage or interact within a scene, or during if there was a historical individual they could either become or they could shadow or they were part of their entourage. All of these things will make a greater impact on the learning experience for a student. And so it'll change all kinds of exactly what surrounds a student in an environment.
Another important point here with edutainment that also ties back to the wellness centers, and it comes back to Holly's point with the typologies of buildings. We're no longer designing specifically a hospital or specifically a school, but we're designing places where multiple interactions can happen at a variety of different times, right? This morphing or changing of spaces. And so education doesn't have to solely happen in a classroom setting, and you don't have to be sitting in a desk that's, bolted to the floor to learn something. Now we can start to bring the classroom to wherever a student or a learner is, right? And we have an interesting picture up here. This is Wonderscope, where it's an AR application that brings children's literature into their bedrooms. That uses a surface to set down the story and start to interact with it with children. So it's bringing that education outside of a classroom as well and getting people to interact with it in other spaces.
Yeah, and this is a really good point. I always tell my students, service architectural firms, which is a sort of a standard architectural firm that we see. We have several here in Fresno. They design three things. They design schools, prisons, and hospitals, and they're all basically the same design. They're just designed differently with a different color palette, a different door, and a different window. But they are spaces that have been designed to move people around the space and to contain people and to actually divide certain populations. So for us to begin to think about, I don't think hospitals, schools, and prisons have can have very negative impacts on people. And so how we alter our environments can totally change the outcome of the learning experience. So there's another area of this entire, that I don't even really have an example for as we move forward, and that's how we perceive space, place, where our place is, and how we communicate. The computer and cyber technologies has allowed us to communicate with people and change time, scale, place in a very unusual way. And historically, this has never happened before. But for instance, through Skype, all of these different types of technology, you can now be with another individual through a different time, in a different time zone, through a screen. But at some point, we will get to the point where we have avatars that we'll be able to interact with another person at a third location, and I personally look forward to the day when I could actually have, say, dinner with a friend in Shanghai at my favorite restaurant in Paris every night, right? And that can happen. I believe that will happen. But I'm going to let Laura take this from here, because she's going to talk to you about how, when you take this theoretical framework, how you can use the technology today.
So for instance, eventually we get to that point where we don't necessarily have this physical screen strapped to our face, right? We're thinking beyond that for the future. But for right now, for today, when we think about how we can interact now with different people in different areas at the same time, we've got a lot of virtual reality hubs and virtual reality spaces that are starting to occur, where two different people in two different locations can pop on a headset and go to a virtual space. And you can make that virtual space, whatever it needs to be, right? You want to take a walk in nature with your friend? Sure. We can set up a virtual forest and you can take a quick stroll, right? So we can start to interact in these different spaces. We also have the opportunity to view events together or go to live events where the event may physically be taking place in a different city that you're not in. and your best friend is also in another city, not in the same one as the event, and you can both attend the event and see what's happening and talk to your friend. Your avatars would be talking face to face, right? So you could feel like you were with your friend in that experience at the same time. And this is really quite an incredible thing. And sometimes, you know, you can say, well, yeah, we got some floating heads. It seems, well, it's not quite there yet, right? Well, it's a big step in that direction. And so if we're here now and we know how quickly technology can evolve, just think what will be in 10 years, in 20 years. Oh. And now I'm going to talk. So now I'm going to be talking about, we're taking that framework and looking at these intelligent interiors and how do we use human-computer interaction and a more recent term, human-building interaction, to take a look at those. So go to the next slide. So human-computer interaction is a multidisciplinary field of study focusing on the design of computer technology and in particular interaction between humans, the user, and computers. While initially concerned with computers, HCI has since expanded to cover almost all forms of information technology and design. Now, human-building interaction is coming out of human-computer interaction. And human-building interaction, we're defining this as human-building interaction is the study of an interface between the occupants, right? That's us, the humans, and the building's physical space and the objects within it. So not only how do I interact with a device, but how do I start to interact with my environment that is now also infused with technology. So I'm living inside the device, right? So here we've got some graphics. Set this. So we have our triangle here of our smart geometry, ambient intelligence, and information modeling. And these are our core that makes up the intelligent user interface framework. And we're really focusing a lot today on the ambient intelligence and how we can create these spaces that are responding to us. We've got the zero user interface surrounding that. Right now, we have a lot of graphic user interface when we're interacting with the Internet of Things. And we also have a lot of voice user interface, right? So we can ask a Google Home to do certain things, and it will oblige us most of the time if we've gotten the command right. Yep. But we're going to be moving eventually to a space where we don't necessarily even have voice commands as much. There'll be sensors that track us and know when we need something, and it will just adjust without us having to ask. And this is all encompassed by our experience. So when we think about user experience as it relates to how we design for technology on a screen, now we're also thinking about user experience as it relates to the technology that's infused around us as well. And so this next graphic starts to look at human-computer interaction, where we have multiple disciplines coming in and overlapping and blending together. Human-computer interaction is a combination, a melting pot of lots of different disciplines that need to work together in order for us to achieve a high level of experience. So we're pulling from cognitive psychology, we're pulling from computer science, pulling from engineering, we're pulling from design and education. So it's very important to have all of that input. We talked earlier during the keynote about having, that melting pot, that diversity that needs to happen for that technology to move forward. This is the same thing, right? We need the diversity of all the different professions as well. So human-building interaction deals predominantly with questions that embody and reflect the complexity of human interaction and our social experience with and within the built environments. And you can see here how we're having the overlapping of that human-computer interaction with the experience. All right, and now we're going to talk about how we can make our own spaces intelligent today, or kind of, right? So we may not be at a space yet where we can walk home and our home morphs into a giant, comfy, soft area where we can just kind of fling ourselves down into a big poof, and then gentle music will start to play and someone will magically show up with a martini for you. We're not quite there yet. But what we can do is to set up different sensors or timers to simulate an environment where when you come home, your home knows you're there, either through tracking you with your GPS on your phone, or maybe you have a smart lock and it knows when you've walked through the door. And then it can adjust the lights if you've got your smart lights set up, and it can put your favorite song on. And maybe you like a cup of coffee in the afternoon, can start the coffee machine for you so you can have your perfect cup of coffee. So you can have this sense of this environment that starts to create these conditions for you. And one way that we can start to set that up is using if this, then that. Have any of you guys used that before? Okay, good. So if this, then that is a way to very quickly and easily connect some of your smart home items to a Google Home or your Google Assistant. You can use it through your phone too as well if you don't have a Google Home. But you can have a variety of smart home items, including your curtains, your thermostat, your locks, and you also have the option of using smart plugs, right, to connect different devices that maybe aren't already smart. And the smart plugs, that pretty much just gives you the ability to turn something on and off. But then if we have different lighting systems, I'm sure you guys have heard of Hue Light, and there's several other smart lighting systems as well that with a special bulb, because it's a smart bulb, will allow you to change different colors. You can program different settings, and you can tie that back in to your Google Home as well. So this is all part of the Internet of Things, right? And so we're tying all these devices together that are connecting out to the Internet and talking to each other, and we're using a Google Home or another sort of smart speaker to control them. All right, so when we're setting up items with, I just wanted to say that we can do a variety of things like adjusting our thermostats, activating our smart lock, or alerting you when someone enters or rings the doorbell, connecting your Hue lights to create a variety of moods and ambiance through the home. And you can set these up to activate through if this, then that. So you could say things to Google like, hey Google, movie mode. And then your lights dim down to maybe a nice soft red so it doesn't interfere with your TV watching. The PlayStation turns on and changes to your movie section. And your Google Home speaker will say a cue to let you know that it's heard you and it's adjusting these things. So here on this slide we can see our quick steps for setting up an if this then that. First step is you create an account, right? You can do this through a browser. You can download the if this then app and use that on your phone. And then you're going to go to the Google Assistant page. And the Google Assistant page is going to have some preset connections for a Google Assistant, either your assistant through your phone or through your smart speaker. You select that option, and then you just hit connect. There's a giant button, it says connect. You hit that, and you're connected. Usually it's going to ask for permission, right? You're going to have to give permission, make sure you're on If you've got 5 different Gmail accounts like me, gotta pick the right one, make sure you're connected. So you grant that authorization. And then you allow Google Voice commands, right? Because if you want to be able to speak to your smart speaker, you have to have those voice commands as well. So now we have applets and recipes. So if this, then that, they used to call all of their, what are now applets, they called them recipes. So you would create these different combinations of interactions. If something happens, then this happens, right? Hence the if this, then that. So there's so many different ones that are available now, and it's really a joy to kind of dig through them when you have time. If you don't have time, there's a lot there, right? There's a lot going on. But you can select a pre-made applet and use it right out of the box. You just turn on the button, you give permission. It's always a good idea to really take a look at what you're agreeing to, right? Who are you giving access to your stuff? So just think before you connect. And then once you've given permission, you perform the trigger. So there's a variety of different triggers that you set up. And so a trigger would be, hey Google, movie mode, right? And that would trigger our option. And you can see on the far side, when we have an applet open, you can see what you want to say, another way to say it, and then another way. And so you can adjust and change those. So maybe you found the perfect applet, but you want to tweak it, you can do that. Even better, you can make your own. So when you go to if this then that on the browser, you're going to go up by your icon or your login and go down to create, and you can create your own. So if you say, if I do this or if I say this, then I want this to happen. So you create a new applet. You can start with the Google Assistant if you're specifically trying to trigger something through a voice command. And then you just follow the steps along. Next slide. You're going to choose, so here this would be where you would choose Google Assistant, but there's a whole bunch of other services that you can pick from. And then you choose a trigger. So how are you triggering it? Are we saying a simple phrase, a phrase with a number, a phrase with a text ingredient, or a phrase with both a number and a text ingredient? So, how is this being triggered? What is the if? So once we have our if, then we can put our then in. So what are we saying? What's another way? How do we respond? Create that trigger. Once we hit create trigger, it's going to come to this screen. And on the application, it's a little more obvious. On the browser version, it's not as obvious. You're going to look underneath the if this then that. It's a giant white screen, and you're going to think, what's happening? You got to click that. So you click that, and then it moves you through to finish setting up your applet. So creating an applet, you have a very simple, if this happens, then this happens. If I say movie mode, then my lights change to red. But what if you want to do something more complex? What if I want to set up an applet to say, hey Google, bedtime reading, and my lights in my bedroom turn on to red at 80% brightness, and then they turn off half an hour later, so I don't read too long. And I don't want to have to get up and do anything to make those lights turn off. And I don't want to have to say anything to make those lights turn off, right? I have a series of things that I want to happen. I can use custom filters and JavaScript. And so by using those custom filters in JavaScript, you can start to tailor more complex applets or recipes to achieve what you want. And so if this then that is something that I would highly encourage you to play around with. There's a free version of it. You can use it on your phone. You can connect it to any smart devices that you have. If you don't have smart devices and you want to make them smart, you can get a variety of different smart outlets and plug them in so you get that on-off functionality. Now, does anyone have questions? Great question. This is good for all smart devices. So it definitely works for Alexa. There's an incredible amount of recipes for Alexa as well. And it works for a lot of other things besides smart speakers. So you can set triggers to pull things from your email if you've tagged them a certain thing and take them and drop them into Evernote. You can drop things into different Google Drives or folders or files. So there's a wide array of things you can do with this that aren't smart speaker related. Yeah. Yeah, so let's say you lost your phone and you needed it to ring loudly. You know, you could say, hey Google, call my phone, and it would call it. You can set it up to do that. You can set it up to text someone that you're on your way home. You could say, hey Google, I'm almost home, and it would text a certain amount of people. You could set it up to do that. Yes, did you have a question?
You hear about Teslas being hacked and things like that while they're driving. So how safe is it?
That's an excellent question. So it depends, right? So there's a level of security that some devices have. Some might be better than others. For instance, the Hue lighting system, they used to always have a hub where all the lighting connects to that hub that is in the home where the lights are controlled. And in order to connect to those lights, their device has to first connect to that hub. So there's some level of security there. That being said, as we know, if something is connected to the internet, it is not 100% safe, right? So there's always going to be some level of possibility there. So it's definitely, you want to look at products that you trust, and when you're using pre-made applets, you want to make sure that they don't look suspicious. So ones that have a greater number of downloads that are coming from reputable sources would be more likely ones you'd want to use. Or if you make your own, then you know what it's doing and where it's going. Any other questions?
Have you heard of any cases of homes being hacked that have a lot of their stuff integrated with this technology?
Personally, not really, but in like a broader general scope, yes. I have heard horror stories of especially earlier smart homes that were completely online being kind of hijacked by someone who had previously lived in the home or been in a relationship with someone. Then they were no longer in the home, but they still had a certain amount of access to content, and being able to take over and kind of harass the occupant of the home. I have heard of cases of that, but I haven't necessarily heard a lot of cases like in the news of someone taking over an unknown person's house.
So usually somebody with like a previous connection.
Right. Good question. Any other questions? All right, well, we're really glad that we got to speak with you guys today. Like I said, I really encourage you to check out If This Then That, and keep imagining what our future can hold, right? When you're in a space, start to think about not only what is the space doing now and today, but what could it be doing? How could it be better? Because as designers and developers, we need to work together and create those conversations and start to think about how we can morph and change the future.
Yeah, that's even how we started. We both came to Fresno State. This is the beginning of our 4th year. And she came from Iowa State, and I came from Washington State University. And we just found a lot of parallels in our research. And so just communicating with, we would have, I don't think, ever thought that we had similarities in our research if you would have just known it up front. So I think, yeah, collaboration works.
Thank you very much.